She been getting phone calls too, huh? Well, wait, what do they want? Huh? Asking when he's gonna kill himself. Wow. Well, that has to suck. Yeah. Okay. Bye. July 22nd, 1944. What happens this week? This week, a bunch of German officers try to kill Adolf Hitler. I'm Indy Neidell. This is World War II. Last week, the Soviets launched a huge new operation in the south of the Eastern Front and expanded the ones in the north. The Allies liberated Caen, part of it, and closed in on Saint-Lô. And on Saipan, Japanese soldiers and civilians committed mass suicide rather than give themselves up to the Americans. Also, an operation to kill Adolf Hitler was pushed forward to this week. And on July 20th, it goes off. At Hitler's Rustenburg headquarters, Klaus von Stauffenberg plants a suitcase bomb under a table in the conference room. This plot was hatched by a pretty large conspiracy of senior officers and politicians. Hitler is badly shaken, but only mildly injured. See, the suitcase is moved by accident by another officer trying to get a better look at the map on the table. Hitler is leaning over the table when the bomb goes off, and the thick tabletop and table frame save his life. The bomb blows at 12:42. Stauffenberg is 200 meters away by this time, sees the explosion, and heads for Berlin, assuming Hitler's death. The plan now for Operation Valkyrie is to overthrow a leaderless Nazi regime. Stauffenberg learns the truth at 4:30 when he reaches Berlin, but they still hope to see their plan through. He and Friedrich Olbricht arrest Friedrich Fromm, commander of the Reserve Army, but plans to surround the government offices go awry when the officer in charge, Otto Rehmer, gets a call from Joseph Goebbels and then talks to Hitler and decides against it. At 6:45 in the afternoon, Goebbels broadcasts over the radio that Hitler is okay. In Paris, though, they still think he's dead, and the conspirators order all Gestapo officers arrested. But by the time it gets dark, they realize the truth. Karl Heinrich von Stülpnagel, who commands the Paris garrison, is ordered back to Berlin. He tries to commit suicide, but only manages to blind himself. Olbricht and Stauffenberg are executed already this evening. The effect of the incident on Hitler is first to increase his pathological distrust of the generals, and second, when combined with the physical deterioration caused by the dubious combination of medicines he takes, the shock of the explosions further weakens his ability to concentrate and to remain stable in the face of reverses. He becomes less interested in his work and more prone to wild outbursts. There will be thousands of executions. Astrid Deinhard covers this in much more depth in our Spies and Ties series, so check that out to get the full story. The conspirators, had they been successful, would need a big name and support like Erwin Rommel's to win over the German officers in the West. But 3 days before the bombing, while Rommel is being driven from south of Caen to his La Roche-Guyon headquarters, he is wounded by machine gun fire from a strafing Allied plane. His work as both commander and conspirator is at an end. That plane, by the way, is flown by South African ace J.J. Leroux. He is the top-scoring pilot over Normandy since the landings with 23 kills. He will disappear over the channel 2 months from now, not having learned the identity of this week's victim. And as for other bombs, the V-1 flying ones, by this week, 3,500 British civilians have been killed by them. So, by the 17th, over 500,000 Londoners have left the capital, and evacuation numbers are actually greater than they were during the Blitz for the time being. On the 18th, the British War Cabinet's Crossbow Committee is warned that V2s might already exist in the thousands, weighing over 13 tons each, traveling close to 6,000 kilometers per hour, which would only take a few minutes to reach London. Winston Churchill tells the committee that if such a thing really does come to pass, he is prepared, after consulting with the US and the USSR, to threaten the enemy with gas attacks on a large scale as retaliation. I read that in Martin Gilbert's The Second World War. There are plenty of bombs flying in the Marianas this week as well. On the 21st, Roy Geiger's 3rd Amphibious Corps lands on Guam. This is backed by 6 battleships and 5 escort carriers, and planes from Task Force 58 carriers help as well. So 13 carriers take part in the air raid. The naval bombardment began 2 weeks ago, and the air raids drop over 4,000 bombs the 18th through the 20th. 3rd Marine Division lands at Caen, and the 1st Provisional Marine Brigade near Agat on both sides of the Orote Peninsula. They do face some resistance, but long before noon they've made their landings, and by the end of the day they have beachheads some 2 kilometers deep. The 77th Infantry Division is to soon land in full as well. Eventually they will land 54,000 men for the campaign. The Japanese have 19,000 men of the 29th Infantry Division here. The 22nd, the Marines launch converging attacks to try and link beachheads. Both advance 1.5 or so kilometers and face heavy resistance. Guam is the biggest of the Marianas and lacks broad beaches for a large frontal assault. So the attackers reckon this to be the toughest part of the Marianas campaign. We'll see soon enough whether or not that is true. The Guam operation is the second part of Operation Forager, part 1 being the attacks on Saipan we saw recently. This all has unintended consequences. All too many Japanese, at least at the highest levels, knew that Saipan represented a watershed setback, one that ominously argues ultimate defeat. The Americans now had a base from which they could bomb the home islands, a game-changing event. The Jushin, a powerful group of unofficial senior advisors to the emperor, had lost confidence in Hideki Tojo. With this mood of discontent, and even some assassination plans in the air, Tojo soon realized he could not hope to survive, politically or otherwise, the loss of Saipan. Tojo's wife even gets phone calls asking her when her husband is going to commit suicide. Well, on July 20th, same day as the attempt on Hitler, General Hideki Tojo steps down as prime minister and leaves active military service. The emperor does not invite him to join the Jushin, which really says something about his current standing. General Kuniaki Koiso replaces him as prime minister, and Admiral Mitsumasa Yonai becomes naval minister and vice prime minister. There's a fair amount of controversy over Koiso's appointment, and I have a feeling that I'll soon have to do another special on Japanese high command and its crazy dysfunction to cover all of that. There's dysfunction in Axis command in the West as well, and it's not just Rommel being out of the picture. The Americans closed within just a few kilometers of St. Louis as last week ended, and elements of the 29th Division begin their final push this week on the 17th. Paul Hauser, German 7th Army commander, asks Army Group B for permission to withdraw from the city, despite Hitler's orders to stand fast. But Army Group B tells him to do whatever he sees fit to do. You may be wondering who gives that order, since it can't be Rommel, and the answer is, I don't know. Eventually, the decision reaches overall Commander Gunther von Kluge, but it's already been taken, and he has no reserves to send in anyhow. The night of the 17th, the Germans begin to withdraw from St. Louis, and the Americans enter the 18th, 6 weeks after D-Day. In the British sector, Operation Goodwood begins as soon as that happens. This is a big push southward towards the high ground beyond Caen. Bernard Montgomery hopes for a breakout, but that's not the main goal. As Monty writes the 15th in the operational order, 1. Object of this operation, to engage the German armor in battle and write it down to such an extent that it is of no further value to the Germans as a basis of the battle. To gain a bridgehead over the Orne through Caen, and thus to improve our positions on the western flank. Generally, to destroy German equipment and personnel as a preliminary to a possible wide exploitation of success. 2,200 planes, mostly bombers, take part, and there are 750 artillery pieces and the fleet guns. The operation begins with the bombing of German positions east of the Orne. This damages the front lines, but the Germans do have a defense in depth. So when the armor gets moving, it advances some 5 kilometers quite quickly, but then starts to get bogged down when the opposition gets serious. The Canadians do get into Vaucelles, another objective, and Montgomery then optimistically issues a report for the BBC late in the day about how well it's going and the great gains they're making. However, the gains made the 18th, which aren't exactly great, are most of the total gains made during Goodwood, so this is really going to come back to haunt him. The Germans were expecting an attack here, maybe not of this scale, but still, and awful weather sabotages further Allied air support. The rains the 20th turn everything to mud, and so Goodwood is over already after like 2 days, 400 tanks lost, 10 kilometers gained, and Schaeff is furious. The Goodwood battle took place at the entire crux of the Normandy campaign, caused a great deal of controversy at the time and since, and requires some careful dissection. The first 2 points are that Operation Goodwood was linked with Operation Cobra, the U.S. breakout at Saint-Lô, and was part of the strategic policy Montgomery had been following since shortly after D-Day, the British to hold the eastern flank and pull the German armor onto that front, while the Americans built up their forces and broke out in the west. And the bulk of the German armor right now is indeed facing the British and Canadians around Caen. Facing the Americans between Saint-Lô and the coast are 6 infantry divisions and 2 panzer divisions. Facing the British are 5 infantry divisions and 7 panzer divisions. So over 600 tanks there, as opposed to under 200 versus the Americans. Operation Cobra is originally scheduled for the 20th. Not on the same day as Goodwood for the simple reason of availability of air power to support both operations. The problem with the schedule is that they haven't had the necessary starting line for Cobra on the Pellier-Saint-Loup road. And there's the weather, of course, so it's going to go off next week. But Goodwood could not be delayed by weather because of the need to keep the German armor tied down. I have a bit more to say about this, about the results and the perceptions of Goodwood among command, and also a meeting between Eisenhower and Monty, which happens this week, but I'll talk about that next week when I get to Operation Cobra. On July 18th, Hitler finally agrees to move mobile units from 15th Army at Pas-de-Calais to Normandy. So the deception of Operation Fortitude is finally over. Funny timing, actually, because Monty writes the same day, "It seems impossible that the enemy should much longer continue to anticipate an invasion in the Pas-de-Calais. He must surely soon give overriding priority to the Normandy battlefields. And when he took that decision, substantial reinforcements would become available from 15th Army." The slow Allied march up Italy also continues this week. On the 16th, Arezzo falls. On the 18th on the east coast, the Poles take Ancona, and on the 19th on the west coast, Livorno goes. So the Germans are withdrawing from yet another defense line. But that is the plan, really. German commander Smiling Albert Kesselring has had to give up Ancona and Livorno, okay, but the Germans have wrecked the ports as much as they wrecked Naples. So while these two will eventually ease Allied supply worries, it will take time to get them working. The Germans are currently pulling back to the Arno line, which runs from Pisa to Florence and then east over the Apennines. This is not, however, where Kesselring plans to make his stand. Speaking of Naples, on the 16th, the first troops of the Brazilian Expeditionary Force to reach Italy arrive here. They'll be needed because on the 21st, the French Expeditionary Force is taken out of the lines in Italy to prepare for Operation Anvil, the invasion of southern France, scheduled for August 15th. Cities are also still falling in Eastern Europe to the Allies. On the 16th, the Soviets take Grodno. They now have bridgeheads over the Niemen River, which the Germans had wanted to use as a defense line. On the 19th, further north, the Red Army enters Latvia. Yeremenko's Second Baltic Front, fighting through the forests and swamps, had nevertheless staved in the Panther Line with the capture of Idrica, Sebej, and Opochka. Second Baltic armies were now penetrating Latvia, and on the left flank, 4th Shock Army closed in on Dvinsk. Bagramian at 1st Baltic Front, with 2 new armies and a mechanized corps under his command, now pleaded for permission to strike at Riga. But again, the Stavka refused. They insist that his next objective is Šiauliai. Their worry is that by the time he could take Riga, the 2nd and 3rd Baltic Front offensives would have pushed Army Group North back to East Prussia, and he would just be attacking empty space. He thinks this is ridiculous because the Germans are not going to be pushed out of the area anytime soon, especially holding good defensive ground. We saw Second Baltics offensive begin last week, and this week, the third of the three staggered northern Soviet offensives goes off. Ivan Maslenikov's Third Baltic Front aiming at Pskov and Ostrov. They begin their attacks the 16th and 17th. And in a couple of days, tear a gap nearly 60 kilometers wide and 40 deep south of Ostrov. By the 20th, they flanked it and take it the next day. As for Pskov, their forward units reach it today, and it will fall tomorrow morning. This is all producing a crisis, yet another one, within German command. On the 16th, Johannes Friesner, Army Group North commander, tells Hitler he's amazed the Soviets haven't already attacked towards Riga, as Bagramian wants to, and rolled up his flank. He says he has nothing to fight off such a move with. Even Hermann Goering speaks up and says the only way to consolidate force would be to pull back to the Dvina line. Hitler agreed that would be simplest, but he contended it would lose him the Latvian oil, Swedish iron ore, and Finnish nickel. Therefore, Army Group North's mission would be to hold the front where it was by every means and employing every imaginable improvisation. Army Chief of Staff Kurt Zeitzler pleads with Hitler to pull back, then offers his resignation, and then just reports in sick. He is not going to be involved. Nope. Zeitzler is replaced by Heinz Guderian as acting chief of staff. That appointment is also the result of the Stauffenberg bombing attempt. Hitler's first choice, Walter Bühle, is injured in the bombing and cannot take the post until he recovers. Guderian is one of the only, if not the only, generals in OKH not under direct suspicion of being involved. It's also Guderian that turns back the tank battalion that arrives in Berlin during the plot to take over SS headquarters. He's also the guy who's lately been accusing other generals of defeatism and even has ideas on how to actually win the war. On Guderian's first day on the job, anyone can see that Friesner's days commanding Army Group North are numbered. German command issues also affect the fight down south. Okay. Ivan Konyev's 1st Ukrainian Front's main armored formations are the 3rd Guards and 4th Tank Armies. And he's been warned by Stavka to not send them in until his infantry has made a decent penetration into the enemy defenses. But he disregards that, and on the 16th sends in 3rd Guards tanks, and the 17th, 4th Tanks. See, by the beginning of this week, his forces have created what is called the Koltov Corridor through the enemy lines. This is like 5 or so kilometers wide, but like 18 deep. And he sends 3rd Guards down this corridor to try to exploit it. This is risky because it's so narrow, and a whole tank army in such a narrow area could be badly mauled by artillery or air power. Konyev is well aware of this, so he has ordered 2nd Air Army to ensure total aerial supremacy in the breakthrough region. Well, 3rd Guards Tank Army shoots the gauntlet, and then Konyev does the unprecedented maneuver of sending another tank army right in behind it. Very risky, but it works. By the end of the 17th, armored spearheads are already at the outskirts of Lvov. But okay, how did Konyev get air superiority here without much effort, when the Germans have Luftflotte 4, the 4th Air Fleet, in the region? This time, it's because of a unity of command. Konyev makes all the calls for his ground armies and the air army. Acting Army Group North Ukraine Commander Josef Harpe cannot do this. Otto Desloch commands Luftflotte 4, and though Harpe can ask him for help, he cannot order him to give it, and Desloch may have other priorities. Harpe calls Hitler and explains that the only real way to stop the enemy armor in the corridor is with the Luftwaffe. Hitler has to then order Goering to send them in, and then Goering has to order Desloch. Hitler, however, is not immediately available, and it takes time after talking to him to reach Goering. Well, long story short, the tank armies are through the corridor before any Luftwaffe power can be brought to bear against them. Still, Konyev's assault on Lvov itself takes more time than he thought it would. Harpe brings over several infantry divisions to beef up the city. 3rd Guards Tank Army gets bogged down north of the city in peat marshes because of the heavy rain, and Konyev absolutely does not want to use his mobile exploitation forces in a siege of the city. By the end of the week, though, things are starting to really go Konyev's way. Brody finally gives in today. It was surrounded last week, meaning the Soviets take another 30,000 Axis POWs and can send 5 more rifle divisions to help take Lvov. Konyev starts shuffling around his formations, preparing for a major assault 2 days from now on the 24th. But hey, what's up with the left wing of Konstantin Rokossovsky's First Belarusian Front, the part that was not committed to Bagration? Well, they finally go into action the 18th near Kovel. First, an artillery barrage, and then the ground forces move in. And by the 20th, they've overrun the local defense lines and are heading for Lublin and the western Bug River, taking Chełm. See, his army was split into 2 by the Pripyat marshes. But by now, the marshes are in the rear of his right wing. So the plan is that while the right wing moves on Brest from the northeast, the previously uncommitted left wing will head for Lublin and sweep past Brest from the south. Semyon Bogdanov's 2nd Tank Army, moving off at dawn today, is forced to keep on the roads by the woods, the swamps, small myriad rivers, and the Germans setting up ambushes as they withdraw towards the city. But by the end of the day, the Soviet armor is poised to attack Lublin from 3 sides on the morrow. I mentioned Chełm. This morning, the 22nd, Moscow Radio announces the establishment there of the Polish Committee of National Liberation. What that means for the Poles, the Soviets, and their allies, find out soon enough. For this week of the war has come to its end. With a frustrated operation in the West, successful operations at several points on the Eastern Front, landings on Guam, an assassination attempt against Hitler. Oh, and this. On the 17th, over 57,000 German POWs are marched through Moscow. 19 German generals wearing their Iron Crosses lead the parade, and at their head is Friedrich Gollwitzer, who we last saw in command of the 53rd Army Corps, surrounded in the first few days of Operation Bagration last month. For the most part, the Russians masked their anger with silence. This chilling and unique display was prompted on the Russian side by the desire to ridicule German assertions that nothing unplanned had happened in Belorussia, and to underline to the Allies that the Belarusian victory had been hard fought. Russians resented suggestions that German troops had been transferred from Belorussia westwards to fight off the invading Allied armies. The parade of prisoners was in part designed to stifle nonsensical talk of this kind. You know, there is another consequence of the failed assassination attempt on Hitler. See, at midnight that night, Hitler goes on the radio to the German people, telling them that he's okay and the war will continue. Naval boss Karl Dönitz then sends a cable to all naval commanders saying that only orders from Heinrich Himmler or Hitler are to be followed. Luftwaffe and Wehrmacht commanders get the same sorts of messages. Hitler, Himmler, and Joseph Goebbels running the radio are now in effective control of the entire German machine. With Tojo now out in Japan, you may want a refresher on what exactly he was trying to hold together and run in the first place. We did, as I mentioned, a special the other year on the Japanese command structure. It's super interesting, and it is right here, anytime now. And all of this is brought to you by the Time Ghost Army. Yep, the mighty Time Ghost Army, of which you can be a part at timeghost.tv or patreon.com. These are the newest commissioned officers in the Army, and the Army member of the week is Nick Macarius. Do not forget to subscribe. See you next time.